G'day and welcome back to Comsverse. Well, today we've got Ben Merrills here giving a session on augmenting direct routing. Ben and I are having a little chat before this session and it looks like it's going to be really interesting. Ben, can you give us a quick chat about what you're doing and lead into your session, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. So we're going to be having a discussion today about augmenting direct routing. Whatever that means, we'll find out soon enough. My name is Ben Merrills. I'm the founder of a company in the UK called Zap Happy. And if I can introduce myself, if you can see my slides. So who am I? I started in telecoms in about 2001. I've worked for ISPs, data center service providers, and telecoms companies. And during all of that time, I've been a software developer, mostly working with .NET, VB.NET, C#. But I've had the unique sort of perspective of being able to get involved in lots of different areas of development, especially within those sectors. And so have had since about 2003 exposure to things like Asterisk, which is an open source PBX platform and media suite. In the last sort of 5 or 6 years, a great set of open source routing components for SIP, like Camielio and OpenSIPs. And I'm also an open source maintainer as well. I have a number of projects on GitLab that relate to the sort of the background from which I come and the company which I work for, Zap Happy. And I'm also a husband and proud father of 3, although if I mention to my wife one more time I need to check my slides, I may have to drop one of those. So first of all, really big thank you to everyone who's helping make Comsverse happen, the organisers, the sponsors, of which we, Zap Happy, are a gold sponsor. You know, for us, it's been an amazing experience so far. We've been with Comsverse since it was supposed to be an in-person event, and hopefully when we finally get to have an in-person event in March, I really look forward to seeing you, hopefully pick up the conversation where we've left off, and maybe just a little bit socially distanced by then. So who are Zap Happy? So as a company, we've had an ethos for a long time that we firmly believe everyone should be able to create something that's unique and that services their needs and the needs of their customers. So founded in 2013 as a SIP applications platform, allowing customers to create sort of new and diverse technology telecoms products without having to be dependent on the carrier that was providing their underlying services. What we quickly learned was that most of our customers were themselves either telecoms resellers or small to medium-sized telecom providers. And we, as a result, expanded our product set and portfolio to include more traditional telecoms products like SIP trunking and other components that they were sort of demanding. And obviously now that includes direct routing as a service. The people within Zap Happy obviously are really important, and we're almost all developers. So we all have a background in either telecommunications, API development, automation, and combined internally we have about 50 years experience in telecommunications and internet services. And automation is a really strong part of that. We aren't a big company, we're a small business, so we heavily rely on our ability to automate process flows, and that covers everything from product provisioning to first line diagnostics and support across our whole product services and suite, and we expose as much of that as possible to our customers. So I'll really quickly jump around some of the products and services that we provide. So numbering, UK numbering, so standard non-geographic free phone virtual mobile numbers, as well as international numbering in 167 countries and porting. We have a number of different portals, complete control over products and services, as well as the ability to sort of get real-time information from all those products, and of course self-service management and provisioning. And again, you know, we sort of talk about these things, but automated provisioning is really important for us because it means that we can provide, and you as a customer can provide services 24/7 without human intervention. And that, you know, one of the places that's really become apparent, for example, is with direct routing, where we've created a PowerShell automation tool for direct routing as well. So we added direct routing to our product portfolio early last year, and we also now have with that direct routing hybrid. And all of that is backed by our portals and our APIs, so you can do complete direct routing, end-to-end provisioning using our API suite. And obviously, intelligence and applications. You know, we'll touch on a few parts of this today, but we do have a complete set of voice applications within our platform that can sit either in the media path or, in the case of dynamic routing service, which we'll cover today, that only operates, for example, at the point of call setup. And we consider ourselves to be a wholesale SIP provider, so our pricing is granular. We employ a sort of pay for what you use model. So what's today's talk about? Augmenting direct routing is a pretty broad topic, but in essence, what we want to cover in this talk is how we can overcome specific issues with direct routing and in the process create something that is better. So, you know, what are those issues? And to be clear, this is just a sample of issues you may run into from a perspective of customer's point of view. There's a relatively big gap in terms of features between Microsoft calling plans and direct routing. As anyone who's set up direct routing will probably already know. So we'll briefly cover what some of those shortcomings are and later on how we can address them. However, there's also a question of customer expectations. If your customer are used to traditional PBXs or on-site or hosted PBX, then you'll start to notice things that are different or just not even there. And although the solution to this part I won't entirely cover in this talk, I have another talk tomorrow called Direct Routing Hybrid, where I'll go into it in much more detail on this topic and how you can get the best out of Teams and your existing PBX. So hopefully you'll join me for that as well. So if we know there are shortcomings, what approaches can we take to overcome them? How do we augment direct routing or bend it to our will, if you like? And what can we do as technical engineers to address those issues? Finally, we'll have a look at the theory in more detail and see some practical implementations of our approach. And hopefully at the end, you'll have some great questions for me. So direct routing common issues. So firstly, let's look at the issue, what those issues are when we compare direct routing to something like Microsoft Calling Plan. Provisioning is a big hurdle for anyone who's not technically capable. You may have the knowledge, but it's a manual approach, mostly still. And is that manual approach going to work for you as a business? How do you, how does that impact you as a resource? And does it make you a bottleneck in terms of user adoption or provisioning? There are also simple things that are missing. For example, caller ID policies only really work best when using a Microsoft calling plan. And that's because you can only set a caller ID policy to use resource numbers that are provided as part of calling plans at the moment, and not those attached as to a resource account as part of something like direct routing. So how will that impact a customer operationally? Are they okay presenting out as an individual DDI as opposed to a company-wide number? So the next two parts many may argue are not an issue. If you have the time and resource, they're not. I watched a session yesterday on how someone implemented direct routing using audio codes for a customer. And like they said, there's a lot to it. You're not going to do this in 20 minutes. And you really, need to consider this. Do you want the responsibility of maintaining the SBC and everything it entails? So, what kind of things does that entail? Do you have the resource to spend configuring an SBC, hosting it and ensuring the high availability? If you're used to a cloud model, even hosting one yourself in Azure or AWS might be more of an undertaking than you first considered. Do you want to be responsible for things like maintenance fees, upgrades, dealing with hot fixes, because something's happened with direct routing and, calls aren't working properly after you transfer them out of a queue? And then there's managing your carrier relationships. Will one carrier service all your requirements, both domestic and internationally? Dealing with something like number faults. Do you really want to be that point of investigative fault finding when working with those kind of problems? The next thing to consider is the transition from an existing PBX to Microsoft Teams. What are the features you need and use every day? Will those features be available to you in Microsoft Teams generally? If you have a sales team or a contact center, for example, will the out-of-the-box queue meet their requirements? Do you use things like music on hold, custom announcements, not just in queues, but in things like transfers as well? And do you need control over inbound calls? Who can call a number, for example? So the benefits of direct routing, and there are a lot. The underlying benefit is you have complete control over that call flow. You can customize that call flow to your, requirements, whether that be, moving it out through different carriers, changing the way that flow works. And of course, you can diagnose it all better because you have real-time access to the underlying SIP call itself, as opposed to, in a calling plan or something where you may have to log a ticket with Microsoft and you're abstracted away from this sort of black box of telecoms. And then integrations directly with carrier networks and APIs. If your carrier has got network level APIs for things like call control, then you can take advantage of far more than you maybe could, by having access to a calling plan. You can look at the areas around provisioning and how you can automate provisioning of porting, of number purchases, of changes to those services at a more granular level. And then, of course, one of the really key things is integration with other SIP platforms. You could integrate directly with legacy PBXs. You can integrate with local carriers for specific requirements like emergency services. And with regards to the PBX thing, that really does link back into direct routing hybrid. So we've taken some time to go over the shortcomings of Teams or direct routing, but let's look now at how we can start to resolve or mitigate those issues. So the first thing we can do is we can tackle is provisioning. Can you automate your ongoing rollout or ongoing provisioning requirements for Microsoft Teams direct routing? The short answer is yes. At Zapappi, for example, we developed an API front end to PowerShell, meaning that customers or even end users can self-service provision their Teams users or resource accounts. So can we implement the missing functionality? Yes and no. So let's look at the no. Currently, the Microsoft Teams voice API doesn't provide the functionality we need to do things like caller ID manipulation and outbound calls. The APIs are more focused, I think, at the moment on contact center type augmentation of call flows, how we move calls from one part of Teams to another, and how you interact with things like the call queue. But over time, this functionality will grow. It is an ever-changing product suite, and we may talk again in 6 months' time, and it's a different story. So the yes, how's that going to work? How can we either look at what our SBC can provide or what our direct routing as a service provider is offering us in terms of extensibility? With SBC vendors, many have sort of additional call routing modules or platforms that can be used to extend the base functionality, but this could be costly. It may not provide all the functionality we want out of the box, but that's down to your own individual business needs. At Zap Happy, obviously we have a really rich history of API-driven development, and as such, we already have many of the tools in our ecosystem that are needed to facilitate those requirements. And we'll go through a few of those in more detail over the next few slides. The next issue is around SBC ownership. So the simple answer is here: either you're happy running your own SBC or you're not. However, it is a bit more to it than that. If you're happy, then you add on, can you add on the missing components to your solution? Does your SBC vendor support or provide those services? If you're not happy running your own SBC, then I think something like direct routing as a service is the answer. Using third party to provide direct routing and the SIP connectivity all in one can give you a much simpler solution. Lastly, do you need to retain parts of that legacy PBX? If you do, direct routing is the only way this can be achieved, I believe. And we've touched on direct routing hybrid on the other slides. It brings together the best of both worlds, Teams and on-prem or hosted PBX, and we'll cover that off a bit more as well. So direct routing hybrid. It is both your on-premises or hosted PBX working with Microsoft Teams. The two of them don't have to be distinct, separate entities. We can start to take advantage of things like extension-based calling. Once Teams and your on-prem PBX are linked, we can start to use things like extension-based dialing and retain those existing dial plans on both sides. We can start to use call queues and treat Teams users like they're just an agent on the end of our existing call queue. And ideally, of course, we can also retain some of that core functionality that PBXs have, like call recording and auditing and logs, so we can review in one simple place all of our call analytics, and we're not looking at two distinct different systems. There are multiple approaches, but they all rely on direct routing. Is one of the things I think that makes direct routing really, special. But not all approaches are equal. I've looked over the last sort of year at how different people are approaching this, and some of the ways that it's been implemented are simpler to do. Others are a bit more complicated, but have some definite wins at the end of them. The underlying principle is for direct routing, it complements a phased migration approach. We can start to break up our rollout to Microsoft Teams. And I think that's going to be really important for a lot of people. So, call flow manipulation. What is it? It's the ability to change something about a call. So that could be, where is the call going to? Where is the call coming from? How is it going to get there? What are the component stages for a call transitioning from A to B? It's decision based. So it either has to be something that's been predetermined, a static list of information, a bit like a dial plan would be in some ways, or it's a set of logical rules that we can evaluate at the point of runtime, and we can start to make some sort of real sort of dynamic decisions about what we're doing with a call. So we're going to run through a scenario, and it's one that we've done a few times now for customers. We have a customer, let's say, who has an international presence and calls many different countries. When calling a country, number presentation for them is really important, and they need to be able to change that number presentation depending on which country they're calling. The reasons are many. But if we've ever received a call on your mobile from a contact center and it was coming from an international number, I don't think you'd be particularly willing to call it back. But if it's coming from an in-country number or a mobile phone number, for example, there's a common practice for marketing companies, it makes it far more likely that you'll return that call. So we need to look at things like caller ID manipulation. We need to look at how we can make real-time decisions about changing that. And obviously we need to have some sort of worldwide numbering, because we can't just go presenting numbers in country that don't belong to us. So one of the solutions we're going to cover off is how we can use something called the Zapappi dynamic routing platform, but generally as an approach it would apply elsewhere. Obviously we can use worldwide numbering, and we're going to combine that with an Azure function or an AWS Lambda. So these are serverless components in the sort of the cloud ecosystem, and they provide really great scalable globally code execution. We don't have to worry about what it's running on, where it is, and we basically can deploy that code and have it scaled out globally. So in our scenario that we've got here, we've got a call coming out of direct routing to the SBC. The SBC is then going to defer the next step to our dynamic routing platform. That's going to invoke a cloud function. The cloud function will return a response about how it wants to change the call flow. That gets pushed back to our SBC, and then the call flow will be executed as requested, and in this case, an outbound call. So functions of dynamic routing. HTTPS REST-based routing platform. So it's an eventing platform, which means code is only invoked when a new call is set up. It's all the logic and the protocol for requesting that is sort of HTTP based, so very standard compliant. Allows customers to take control of routing at the point of call setup, and that's really important. This is only happening when a call is set up. There's no ongoing involvement with the call. Control onward call routing. So, what do we want to do? Do we want to change where the call is going to, the request URI? Do we want to change the dialed number? Do we want to control the caller ID, who the call is coming from? And it can be used obviously with those low latency services that we mentioned, AWS, Lambda functions. There are many more, because it's designed to be something that can be executed in just 10, 20 milliseconds. It's all secured over HTTPS, and it's a real-time interaction. So every time a call is made, a decision is made and passed back. So what I've got here is an overview of how dynamic routing works from the point of view of a remote web service. In this case, we're using an Azure function to process our request and return a response. So this is triggered. It's a HTTP trigger function. meaning it's invoked by the dynamic routing platform and makes a request to the function. And when that request comes in, we deserialize the JSON body of the request to an instance of a local class here that we've just called dynamic request model. This has all the properties we need to inspect from the dynamic routing service. So then we can compare information from there, so the dialed number in our example, or the request user property, to see what action we need to take. And once we've made a decision or a choice about where the call is going to be sent or how we're going to change it, we can then decide what number we want to present on the outbound call. And then at the end, when we're done, we return our response from the function. The function serializes that back to JSON and hands it back to the dynamic routing platform. And in this case here, you can see, for example, we're looking to see if it's a UK call, and if it's a UK call, we're going to present as a UK number. And if it's a German number, then we're going to present as a German number. And if it's none of those, we're just going to say we don't know what to do, and we'll return a 500 on the call. So how could we build on this? The example that we just looked at was pretty static. The information was all there inside the function. So the first thing we could do is take that variable information out of the code and into a database. And that then frees up, of course, how we maintain the logic of that function. It also frees up who can maintain it, and gives us the ability to surface that information in something else. We could use the same principles in other routing situations. So this doesn't just have to be used on an outbound call. What if we wanted to use the same principle on inbound to make a real-time decision about a failover route? You know, Teams is down, for example. Where do we want to route the call? Do we want to, route it to someone's mobile number, or even better, do we want to integrate with an external data set? Do we want to look at something like Active Directory or a web API? So, a custom company directory maybe that we maintain. Or do we want to produce something that does intelligent routing between multiple tenants? This sits in front of direct routing, so it can be used to offset where we are routing calls to. So let's take an example of a doctor's surgery or a dentist's dentist practice that may have multiple tenants. You call one number, and then we make a decision about which tenant we're going to put that call into at the point of call setup. So what conclusions can we draw from this scenario? So we can add functionality to direct routing. That's the key thing that we can gain from this. It is not like a calling plan. It is not a black box. It's not a set of static APIs that we just have access to. We can do more with it. We can use tools around us to add that functionality that we need. Direct routing can be a more accessible platform than closed systems like Microsoft calling plans. And that really is one of the key drivers for me. And ensure that your direct routing solution, either your SBC vendor or your direct routing as a service provider, can give you this level of extensibility. So what if we were looking at accessing and setting network information? So what is that? So, the ability to access numbers based on a caller ID, or the ability to query information from direct routing, such as numbers associated with restrictions, so restrictions groups, for example. So we've got a second scenario, and here we're going to be looking at how we have a customer, and the only requirement they have is that they need to be able to screen calls into their calling platform based on pre-qualified caller IDs. The customer needs to be able to maintain one or many list of caller IDs that are allowed to dial one or more numbers. For example, if they ran an out-of-hours service and they didn't want anybody else to be able to call that, just particular pre-registered customers. And they want to maintain this information easily from within Microsoft Teams. We don't necessarily want to have lots of different platforms that we're logging into. How could we go about providing this? Firstly, we need some sort of restrictions API that gives us the ability to maintain an allow or deny list that we can apply, let's say, to our inbound phone numbers. Secondly, we need access to the phone numbers associated with direct routing and which restrictions lists perhaps those numbers are applied to, and also a list of the calls that have come in on those numbers or gone out from those numbers. And finally, we want to surface all this information into Microsoft Teams. And I think a really nice, simple way of doing that is with a Teams tab. We could go the full hog and create a Teams app with tabs, but for this demo, we'll just look at a Teams tab in an existing channel. So Zap Happy restrictions list allows us to maintain a collection of allow or deny lists. Each number on the platform can be associated with one or more of these lists, and our API allows you to maintain information from outside of our management portals. Next is the call history side of things. So we have a call history API, so we can access information about who's called into a direct routing tenant, and not just the per user level. Again, all available via REST API. And finally, we need information about what numbers we have pointing to direct routing. Again, our API can tell you that information along with what restriction groups are applied to them. So these APIs can do a lot, but for the purpose of the demo, we're just going to cover off those parts for today. The REST API is all using is all documented using Swagger. So this is great for anyone who wants to quickly investigate the API or create a client. Swagger is an open source documentation standard for RESTful APIs, and it makes it very easy to generate new clients in many different languages. As you can see here, we can create them in C#, and that's supposed to be VB.NET, .NET Standard and Core, PHP, Perl, Java, Python, and even PowerShell. It's documented online standard, all using something called the Swagger spec. It's backwards compatible, and Microsoft actually has a really good tool called AutoRest, which will allow you to generate clients. And one of their recent updates, and there's a slide towards the end with a link to it, actually has a link to the update they added for generating clients for PowerShell, which means if you are, really good at PowerShell, you could, in theory, automate all this through that as well. So how can we surface or bring that information into our Teams tab? So I've created here a new tab in my team. And what I want to do firstly is expose potentially the API information about the numbers and DDIs available within my business. So in this case, my main resource numbers. And then I also want to combine that with the restrictions API to show groups and entries. So I can have here, for example, a premium support access whitelist. I can go into that. I can maintain a list of telephone numbers, and all of that is done before the call even hits direct routing. I can do the same for an out of hours access telephone number, for example, as well. Or I could use a restrictions list if I didn't want certain people being able to call in for, if someone's called in on another number before, and we no longer want to give them access to the service. So a few conclusions from our second scenario. We can bring third-party information into the Teams UI. We can access underlying network APIs to surface information relating to our business operations. And so what that means is that we can take that core bit of information that controls how calls are entering or leaving our business, and we can bring them directly into an interface where a management team can look at them. And we can make this manageable by the people who need it most and who are going to use it. So of course we could combine those two scenarios quite easily. You know, if we did, we could create a complete management dashboard for direct routing. You know, the ability to control caller presentation based on dialed numbers, or even now Teams usernames in the current version we've just released. You can make decisions based on which user has made a call out of direct routing. Allow the users to administer the restrictions, those inbound blacklist, whitelist, allow list, deny lists, and present all this information directly into the Microsoft Teams UI, all controlled in real time, you know, using those APIs and those serverless functions. And it doesn't have to be just for one customer. Once we've abstracted out that information, like we did in the first example, and we've taken it out, you know, those variables out of the code, we can then start to say, we can reuse this. We can use this for multiple customers or for multiple teams, or, you know, however we want to separate that out. So quick mock-up here, you know, we've got, for example, some of our outbound caller ID rules. Anyone dialing United Kingdom presents as this, United States presents as this, Germany presents as this. Particular users, for example, we could also force a different caller ID to the one that they might have associated with them direct routing. And again, all manageable in one interface. So I mentioned that PowerShell auto rest. If you're really interested in having a look at that, you can grab the slides afterwards and find that link. And we've got to the end. I'm amazed that's gone incredibly quickly. There is a breakout session afterwards. I would love to speak to you. If there's anybody out there, if I've just been talking to myself, I'll sit there quite happily. We also, of course, really value feedback. All of us, you know, none of us can do these sessions unless we know what we've got right, what we've got wrong. So please take the survey. And James, I'm sure you'll tell me now if I do have any questions, or if I can go off and be done.
No, well, look, we do have a couple of people sitting here in the chat, so unfortunately you can't go learn how to pronounce routing just yet. But no questions so far, so I do urge anyone, if you've got questions, post them now. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap the event up and head over to the breakout room. So we'll just give that a few minutes to go through because of the delays that we do get with live events. But no, that was a really good and informative session. I, as a voice guy myself, I found some stuff in there that was really good and handy from my side too. So no, that was fantastic.
Cool.
And I think that's all we've got. No questions in this field. So link to the survey is posted in the live event Q&A, as well as the link to the breakout session. We'll see you all there, and come have a chat with us in more real time, off the record kind of thing.
That's great. Thank you.